Step up to the plate and get your QPL Special Edition Mets Library card. Current QPL card holders and new card applicants can get this free card at any QPL location. Learn more at queenslibrary.org/Mets and check out our amazing array of free books and services at Queens Public Library. Libraries are full of stories in a variety of formats, from picture books to large print, audiobooks to ebooks, and more. But there's so much more to the story. This National Library Week, from April 23rd through April 29th, discover everything that Queens Public Library has to offer beyond books. Visit queenslib.org/Library Week 23 for more information. Hip hop's 50th anniversary represents a milestone for a global genre of music and culture that started right here in NYC. Queens Public Library, with funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, is embarking on an epic year-long celebration. The programs that are part of this national initiative will be in-person, live-streamed, and archived for future generations. Register today to stay up to date on scheduled events at hiphop50.queenslibrary.org.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Ada Calhoun, author of Also a Poet, Frank O'Hara, My Father, and Me. Tom Hanks, actor and New York Times bestselling author of Uncommon Type, says, Also a Poet covers turf that is delicate, fought over, and sacred. What poet is not one complicated creature? Whose father is not a confounding mystery to a daughter? What era of New York was not a fevered, fervent time? Let Ada Calhoun be our guide through all, but hold her hand tight. The journey is wild. Publishers Weekly states, mesmerizing, as Calhoun attempts to course-correct Sheldal's shortcomings, which she details at length in the book And to His Face, she crafts a masterpiece entirely her own, tapping into the perpetual wonder that imbued O'Hara with an enlightened saint-like quality, to radiantly explore her naughty relationship with her father, the saddest part of my childhood and the greatest gift of my life, she says. It's a dazzling thing to behold. Library Journal writes, deeply moving and exceptionally well written, this offbeat memoir will please anyone interested in the New York City art scene from the 1950s on. Every father should have a daughter as loving, perceptive, and honest as Calhoun. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Penk, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, and have recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Mary A. Media in 2011. It is currently streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, was just released by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Ada Calhoun is the New York Times bestselling author of St. Mark's is Dead, Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, and Why We Can't Sleep. She has written for the New York Times, the New Republic, and the Washington Post. Thank you for joining us, Ada.
Thank you, Brian. You should have let me do your intro. You're so impressive. I'm glad to be here with you.
That's very generous. Thank you. So I'm pleased. I should make sure that I'm pronouncing your father's last name correctly. Is Sheldal?
Sheldal, yes. It's
Sheldal,
just like
okay.
shell like a seashell and doll like a baby doll. People kind of see the J and panic.
And they get thrown, yeah.
So it's, yeah.
Okay, I'd seen it in writing for years, but never had to pronounce it. So I was like, oh my gosh, how do I pronounce it? I think it's
Norwegian.
Sheldal. It's Norwegian, yes.
The curse, yes.
Your dad was a very well-known and quite respected art critic for the New
Yeah.
York Times, the Village Voice. He was the head art critic for the New Yorker. And his idol was the poet Frank O'Hara. You begin your memoir by discovering that he had intended to write a biography of O'Hara. Please tell us about this insight and what eventually led you to write Also a Poet, because that was kind of the enzyme, right?
Yes,
That
that was
started
exactly
yours.
right.
Yep.
Yes, I found these tapes in my parents' basement in 2018. In the fall, I was looking for a toy for my goddaughter who lives in Queens, I should add. She was 3 at the time, and I had an idea that I left something in there that she might like. And when I was looking for this toy, I found this cardboard shoebox of cassette tapes. And I asked my father what they were because they had all these labels on them, kind of crinkly labels. And it said like Larry Rivers and Kenneth Koch and Barbara Guest. And I said, what is all this? He said, oh God, I don't want to look at it. He said, I was trying to do this biography of Frank O'Hara and I never finished it. And I don't even want to like look at these tapes because they remind me of my failure. And I said, well, can I take them? Can I try to do something with them? So, my day job is ghostwriter,
Right.
and I usually get a lot less material than 40 hours worth
Wow.
on something. And I said, let me do something. And he's like, just as long as you get them out of my sight, you can do whatever you want.
Your dad's voice really comes through in your writing. You really capture. I didn't know him obviously, and I've never really heard him speak, but I felt like I knew him reading the conversations between the two of you. Why did the project fall apart for him? He was working on it himself years back. Why did it not happen?
Yeah, so he started working on it right around when I was a baby. I was born in 1976. And that was around when he got the contract to do the official biography. And I never knew why he hadn't done the project. And he just said, oh, it fell apart. The estate stopped, wanting to give me permission. And I thought, oh, what did you do? I thought, oh, surely he did something wrong.
He must have upset somebody.
He was known for not being necessarily the most gracious, generous person in his relationships. And so I thought, oh, well, you screwed something up. And I thought, well, that won't be a problem for me because I'm very nice and I write thank you notes and I'm gonna succeed where you failed. And that was my big plan. So there's a little bit of a whodunit in the book where I'm trying to do this project and it's not going so well. And I'm very surprised for a lot of the book. And then I get some answers at some point about why he failed and why I ultimately failed too.
And I'm going to pick your brain a little bit later about some of those things. I'll be more specific. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about your day job as a ghostwriter. You've ghostwritten a lot of very successful books. Can you tell us about the process of ghostwriting? I'm so fascinated by this idea of becoming someone else to write their story on some level, at least on paper, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that process?
Sure. Yeah, it's a little like letting them live in your head. It's a little bit like like just being their typist for their thoughts. So usually what happens is I interview them, dozen hours maybe I'll get if it's a celebrity, and then I transcribe all the material, and then I move it around. I shape it into something. That's one of my favorite things to do is structure a book. It's like a crossword puzzle. I've done so many now. I've done about 25, and so now I can start to see it when I have the transcripts. I can get like, okay, this is the beginning, this is the end, this is the climax of the book, and then I structure it and I give it to them, and sometimes they like it right away, and sometimes we need to work on it a lot, and then we go back and forth, and then it goes to an editor, and then I usually kind of work with the editor too.
Are these almost always of the 25? How many of them would you say were memoirs or autobiographies? Most of them?
Gosh, I'd say 15 or between 15 and 20. A lot of times books are hybrid too, so it's advice and memoir together sometimes. And I've done fashion books and finance and crime. I've done lots of things.
And you often as part of the contract that I guess you can't reveal, right? Who you're ghostwriting
sorry.
for. Yeah. I won't ask you to name names. It's okay. I was just curious about how the behind the scenes stuff works.
If we were in person having cocktails, I might share, but we are on the internet and I'm drinking seltzer stuff.
Well, what are you doing tomorrow night? No, I'm only kidding. Also a Poet is the title of your book, but it also refers to your father. You mentioned that the term Also a Poet was used, and this was very fascinating to me in the New York Times obituary for
Yeah.
O'Hara when he was killed on Fire Island by a dune buggy, and he was only 40 years old. This was 1966. The headline was Exhibitions Aide at Modern Art Dies, also a poet. So I guess it's like a triple entendre, because on some level you also are a poet. I mean, you write your own work too, and that's a kind of poetry. So can you talk to us a little bit about the title?
Yes, it's been so lovely having that title, because I really didn't know what it meant exactly. I just read the obituary and I saw that those three words together, and I thought, oh, that just sounds like a title. It sounds
Yeah.
right. And also I like the idea that a lot of the book is about legacy, right?
Mhm.
And Frank O'Hara's legacy in that moment from the paper of record was, oh yeah, he did this poetry thing, and
Mhm.
it made me kind of laugh, like the idea that we know him so well as this great, extremely
Yeah.
influential poet, and even in my household growing up, that he was this god of poetry. And he was like, oh yeah, he was mostly a curator, like according to the New York Times upon his death. So as I was on book tour, everybody seemed to have theories about what the title meant, and I felt much smarter than I actually was in naming it that. One person in an audience in, I can't remember, like, Cleveland or something, said, oh yes, it's because it's about how we identify. Do we identify as a parent or as a
Oh,
writer?
I like that.
Right? It's
Yeah,
smart. I know.
that's really
I
smart.
never would have thought of it, because a lot of the book is about my father's desire to only be known as a writer and to focus on writing to the exclusion of everything else,
Yeah,
including family. Whereas
yeah.
I'm trying to be both, right? I'm trying to say, like, oh no, I'm a parent and a writer and a friend and all these other things. It's not the only thing I am as a writer.
And I really loved how revealing and honest you were about the way he perceived writing and family and the way you approach writing and family. And that was just, it was very, very generous, the amount that you shared and how you went about sharing it. Um, were there any big surprises? I mean, your dad, he's your dad, but in researching this, was there anything where you were like, wow, this was really a shocker to me?
Well, it's funny. When I first told him I wanted to do it, he said, oh, the interviews are bad. They're really terrible.
Mhm.
And I thought, no, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Especially you did so many of them. You worked so hard,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing you traveled all these places, and you're very smart. I'm sure they're great. And then as I was listening, I was like, oh no, they're bad. They're actually quite terrible. And the reason that they were bad was similar to the reason that he was difficult as a parent. He didn't listen. He wasn't
Mm,
paying attention. He would ask the
mm.
question and then he would shout the person down and try
Ah,
to make his own point of view known. And so you
wow.
wind up with these tapes where it's his opinion over and over, and you don't actually get a lot of the texture in many cases of what the person was trying to convey.
Wow, if you had to quantify that, like, what percentage would you say was then usable for you of all the 40 hours you said?
There was 40 hours. If I'd been trying to do, if I'd been doing a biography, I think I could have eked it out, you know.
Uh-huh.
But it actually wound up being a gift that I didn't wind up doing a straight biography the way I'd hoped, because the material was much more revealing about
Sure.
who my father was,
Yeah.
about these intangible things about O'Hara, than it was facts and anecdotes that would be really useful if you were doing somebody's life story.
I think that was something else. You really captured an essence of two people, of three people. Yourself, and also your dad, and also O'Hara. And I thought that was like, there was a soul in the book that you don't get from a
Oh,
lot of straight biographies, right?
oh, good.
Um, you write about how strange, that was the word you used, right? To hear recordings of your parents as younger people, because you don't, this is something that we never talk about or think about, but we all only know our parents as middle-aged or older people. We don't
Right,
know them as young people.
right.
Um, say more about that, about hearing their voices as young people for the first time.
Yeah, it was very strange to hear. He was in his 30s, late 30s, I guess. I think he was 40 at some point in the when he was working on it. Um, and yeah, I mean, he was nervous, and I think
Mhm,
also, as I'd known him in as an adult, especially, he was so well respected, as you mentioned. He
mhm,
was so accomplished, and to hear him kind of nervous and more or less starting out in this way,
mm.
and especially trying to write a book which he'd never done before and was not succeeding at. It was interesting to hear him so unsure. So that was really fascinating. And as I was listening to the tapes, also I heard myself as a baby. I wandered into the scene a couple of times while he was doing interviews. He was very exasperated. He's like, "Oh gosh," and so yeah, I don't know. It was funny. My cat like meows into the tape recorder at one point. My cat has been dead for 20 years, and there's
Wow.
something about listening to those tapes, and I listened to them alone, like in a shed during lockdown, where I really felt like I was living in that moment and seeing my household as it was when I was, 1 and 2.
Wow. That's, we talk about memories and how they're highly unreliable. I think it's fair to say that memories are typically pretty subjective
Hmm.
and they're not
Yeah.
objective records, right? How did your own memories complement or clash with some of the research you had uncovered?
Uh, it was interesting. I felt pretty vindicated.
Hmm.
So my father was diagnosed with cancer while I
Yes.
was working on the book. He was given 6 months to live, and then he responded very well to immunotherapy and wound up living for 3 more years. Um, and so I had to show him the book, which I had not necessarily been anticipating, and I showed it to him, and he said it was true.
Hmm.
And so in terms of validation of memory, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
Just there are a few little things that weren't quite right, or things he didn't really want me to share, and I tweaked those. But overall, he said it's honest and it's true and it's real, and he gave me his blessing, and
No,
uh,
that's great.
and so that was that was a great gift.
Thank you. And I know I was actually going to get to that a little bit later. He passed this past winter,
In
right?
October.
Late 2022, October. Yeah. Yeah. My
Yeah.
condolences. I'm very
Thank you.
sorry. So much of the book is also, as with some of your other books, a love letter to New York, and particularly the New York of the past. You also write about how your dad would defend New York from people who badmouthed it and claimed its changes were bad. Please tell us
Right.
about your dad's relationship to New York as well as your own.
So he grew up in the Midwest,
Hmm.
suburban small town kid, and then he discovered Frank O'Hara in a poetry anthology, and he wanted to be here because he wanted that life. He
Hmm.
just thought that was cosmopolitanism and glamour, and he wanted to drink cocktails and smoke cigarettes
Yeah.
and have parties on rooftops. And so he came here and he did it. And it's amazing to me that he was able to become friends with the people that he admired and to have this career that he dreamed of when he was back home in
Yeah.
Fargo and Northfield.
Wow.
So I was born into it because of him,
Mhm.
because he had the wise the wise anticipation of my needing to grow up here. Um, so
I love that.
uh, I grew up in the East Village. My mother was
Mhm.
an actress when I was growing up, and we ran a shop, and so they had this very artistic bohemian life. And yeah, I was one of the few kids in the East Village at the time as a kid, because that it was pretty empty in the mid 70s here. There were reasons people left, and I always tease them. I dedicated St. Mark's is Dead, the book I wrote about my neighborhood,
Mhm.
to my parents, because they said they're the only people who would like come to New York in the mid 70s and be like, "Oh yes, the East Village, what a wonderful place to raise a child." It's like trash everywhere, just like junkies, dead
Well,
bodies in the park, and like, yes,
th-
perfect.
there's a kind of romance to that, though. Honestly, like when you think about like the gritty New York of the '70s, that is
Uh-huh.
the quintessential neighborhood, and you're still there. We should
I
say,
am
right?
now. I'm back
Yeah.
again. I moved back
Okay.
to the East Village in the fall. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So recently.
I was in
Um.
Williamsburg for 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um. So to gain access to Frank O'Hara's poems, you had a lot of hurdles, not the least of which was his sister, Maureen, who was kind of a gatekeeper of his work. And she had remembered that your father, to your point earlier, once said that John Ashbery was the better poet and that Frank only achieved success because he wrote about his sex life and homosexuality and was social and good at networking, or was the glue, right, that held the community together. How did you ultimately end up winning Maureen over, who was, I guess, based on the your account, kind of contentious and defensive during your initial call with her? um she thought you would like dishonor her brother, I guess, right?
Right. That was my
Yeah.
only call with her.
Okay.
The only
Yeah.
time I've ever spoken to her. So you'll notice there is no quoting of the poetry in the book, except for very like a couple words here and there, and that is because I didn't get permission. So that I feel like we're giving something away, a spoiler, but ultimately the book wound up not being a biography, and so I didn't need to quote from
Right.
his work, because the book wound up being about me and my father, and
Yeah.
about my trying to do the book. And then
Right.
there are a lot of good, I think, a lot of good anecdotes and memories of Frank O'Hara from people who knew him, from that I found on the tapes.
Mhm.
But it's not a biography.
And what's really cool about your book, and I think I told you before we went on air, is that it's so much a hybrid. It's this wonderful
Mm.
combination of biography, of memoir, of cultural criticism, of essay, and they all seem to really complement one another really
Oh,
well.
thank you.
Yeah. So by the 1970s, your father was concerned that pop music was hurting or taking the place of poetry, and that poetry might be losing its social value and function. Talk to us a little bit about that, and your thoughts about poetry's role in 2023.
That was that was one of the funny surprises, actually, is when I was researching him and things he'd written around the same time. He had written a letter to the editor about poetry, and about I think, I can't remember, it was the director, was it Jonas Mekas? No, it was, I can't remember who it was. Anyway, who had said, yeah, the poets have had it, as soon as, or Taylor Mead
Telling me,
had
yeah.
said, yeah, as soon as he saw like Bob Dylan in the Village singing, he said, oh, the poets have had it, because here comes folk music to
Okay.
take all the glory. And my father had written a letter to the editor, I think to the Times, quoting that and saying something about, like, yeah, how do you just decide what a good buggy whip is now, because nobody needs it anymore. And the
Yeah.
same is true for poetry. He really left the scene and sort of threw a match behind him, and caught it on fire. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have good friends who are poets. I love poetry, but it is different now, and I think maybe some of it is that music has taken the fire,
Some of the thunder. Yeah,
thunder.
we were very lucky to have Diane Seuss last summer, who had just won
Oh,
the Pulitzer for poetry.
oh yeah.
So that was exciting to see that,
Hmm.
and it had such an impact. She got so much press, and she was kind of like a rock star for a little while,
Yeah.
which is exciting. Um, so you wrote in the book that you were surprised to find so much darkness in O'Hara's story. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly it was that was so troubling or dark?
Well, I thought the era would be really fun to read about
Hmm.
and listen to stories about. I imagine it being, all parties, and when people smoked inside, and there was this sense of having escaped mainstream culture, and in the Village, and really, like, just being these bohemian, fabulous people. So that's what I was expecting,
Hmm.
and what I found was that it was not a lot of fun for women and children. A lot of
Hmm.
it. I mean, there was something about it that was so macho, and I don't know. It was fascinating to me, hearing the way some of the people my father interviewed talked, and depressing. Frankly, it was not a pleasurable experience.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting insight. Um, and you also mentioned that growing up in a bohemian New York scene, in retrospect, was especially questionable for a child. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that there was a sense of liberation and freedom people felt moving to New York, and especially moving to the Village. And it this sense of freedom was prized over security, and often over some of the things that make it more comfortable for children,
Mhm,
for reliability and
mhm,
practicality. And um, so I was able to kind of relive the costs of that when I was working on the book, and to think through, what does it mean when you have a father, for example, who doesn't really want to be a father. I mean, he did not want to be a father, but didn't want to do the fathering, because he was identifying purely as a writer.
writer, sure. Do you think so much of that, or some of that, informed your own desire and decision to ultimately become a writer?
I didn't really want to be a writer for a long time, and I fought it, because I thought what he said was true, that in order
Mm,
to be a great writer, you couldn't also, be part of the PTA, for example.
Mhm.
And I think the book was almost this exorcism of that idea. I think I carried
Mm.
it around with me for a long, long time. And even after I'd had a bestseller and I'd written, 2 dozen books and I'd done all these things, there was still this feeling. And I think a lot of women writers I know have dealt with it, especially, um, that you can't be good and great, right? You have to at some point make some choice
Mm.
between showing up for your family and showing up for your art. And so the book was really a questioning of that idea. Is there some way in which you can do both?
And you feel like you certainly are being able to, you are able to balance the 2.
I mean, you can ask my kid; he's in the other room. But, 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 uh, but I think, I mean, I've definitely tried. I've definitely
Mhm.
tried in a way my father didn't, and I think, knock on wood, I'm really close with my son and my stepson, and I've got a ton of godchildren, and
That's great.
I'm a good friend, and those things are really important to me. It's also important to me to try to be as good at writing as I can, and to keep getting better with every book. And
Sure.
but I don't think they're mutually exclusive anymore the way I used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, double the workload. It's a lot of work, and it requires a great commitment, but it's doable to be great at both. Sure. You just have to really work hard at it, I suppose.
You have to
Um,
want to. I mean, I
if you want
think, and I'm sure there are ways in which you sacrifice one for the other, all the time. But I also think there are ways in which being a whole person makes everything better.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Part of this, you were delving like really sensitive personal stuff in this project. What was the emotional or psychological toll? It had to have affected you in some way.
I feel like we should bring my therapist on and like um it was really hard. I mean,
Yeah.
it was during also, so I started working on it in 2018, sort of a little bit, um and then I was working on it, and then it what happened in very quick succession was, my father got diagnosed with cancer. My parents' building burned up in a freak electrical
Yeah,
fire. They were
it's in the book.
displaced. My grandmother died. My father-in-law died, and COVID hit, like all in the same, like less than a year.
Wow.
And I was trying to write the book at the same time, and so I was dredging up all these things I hadn't really dealt with about my relationship with my father while I'm taking care of him and taking him to cancer appointments. So
Wow.
it was a year.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I always say, I guess thank God we're writers because we have this facility to like process really difficult
Yeah,
emotional, psychological things.
yeah,
I find it kind of therapeutic to at least kind of process it through a project.
right.
Um,
You can make something out of it. You can try to
you can
make
make
meaning
something out
out
of
of
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to be, I guess I have a sort of cynical sense of humor, but no matter how bad things get in my life, I'm always like, oh, well, it's material.
Everything is copy, right?
Everything's coffee, exactly. So, let's take a look at some of the photos, that you shared
Oh,
with us,
right.
and you can
Yeah,
maybe
I don't
narrate.
remember what I sent. I think I just, oh yeah, so
Yeah.
that's at my aunt and uncle's wedding, I think. Yeah.
And how old were you here, do you think? Maybe 1?
Gosh, I was probably, yeah, between 1 and 2. So I was
Not too bad.
actually, it's so funny. I didn't even notice before. That's probably right around when he was working on the book.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
And there he is in his office, which is now my office, which is where I am at the moment.
Oh, that's
Isn't
great.
that funny?
We should do a side by side. I love
It's a little different. But
it.
yeah, he's like chain smoking and sort of scowling. And he had that dictionary. I used to go look up words in that dictionary all the time.
Oh, right here. Yes. Okay. I love
Oh,
this.
Halloween. That was one wonderful thing my parents did, was they made my Halloween costumes every year. We all made them, and the budget had to be less than $10 and
Uh,
all handmade. So this is all like sheets painted and with a leotard, and I'm sure
That's
like I'm sure the wand was made out of like cardboard or something.
that's great. It forced you all to, innovate and be really creative.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Joffrey ballet for I was did ballet for like 10 minutes.
Oh,
And they
okay.
were really mean. They were really mean to me
Oh,
when I was doing ballet. And my mother said, "Yeah, that's because they think you're good." And I was like,
oh.
"What kind of horrible after-school
Fascinating.
activity gets harder and meaner when you're good at something?"
That's funny.
Just my mother smoking. There are not that many pictures of my parents not smoking. My entire childhood.
Well, this is the 70s, right? 70s into the early 80s.
This is probably 82-ish. And here's another funny thing. This is also in this exact room because my father's office was what became of the original kitchen, and that's the original kitchen. So it's right here.
Wow.
So I'm looking out that window right now.
You need to like print all these out, including where you are right now, and like frame them and like have like a
or
sequence.
Do the opposite, Brian. Maybe I just never look at them again.
No. This is a great photo.
James Hamilton took a series of pictures, and one of them, which is in the book of this at this book event, 1984, somewhere in there. So yeah, that's both my parents, and I don't know what I'm holding, some writing or something.
That's great. I love that photo.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this was at the book party for St. Mark's is Dead, which I had at Cooper Union in the East Village, and it was a really fun book party. I had a bunch of my friends who were in bands play cover songs of songs that mentioned St. Mark's Place as like the replacements, and it was super fun.
That's cool. What year was this about?
That was 2015.
15.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and this is that's Frank O'Hara's handwriting. He wrote to my father for Peter with Palship from Frank, and that was, I think we figured out like 2 months before he died.
And then of course,
I love that picture. Yeah.
Frank O'Hara.
Yeah, that's Frank O'Hara with his typewriter. I think that picture's by Renata Ponsold. I'm even mispronouncing her name, but she was a great photographer of that era, and she shot all like him and all his friends at various points.
And thank you, Eve. You could take it down. Of course, Frank was young. He was 40 years old. It was a really tragic, untimely, sudden death. You also described the author Lucas Matheson as a defender of O'Hara's soul, I think you phrased it, and the moral heart of the interviews. Can you talk a little bit about that, about him?
So he was the only person my father interviewed who'd been a child when he knew O'Hara. So most of the people he talked to were fellow poets or artists he collaborated with, or lovers, or his brother. But there was one child, and it was Peter Matheson's son, Lucas, and it was the most beautiful interview by far of all of them. And he talked about O'Hara swimming in the ocean at night, and how they had food fights, and how he Lucas Matheson had written this like incredibly long story about a medieval dog named Arf, and Frank O'Hara read the whole thing, gave him thoughtful feedback on it. I mean, just what a guy, what a wonderful man. And it made me love Frank O'Hara even more. And it also really begged the question for me of why didn't my father see that part about O'Hara, right? He copied the drinking and the smoking and the writing style and a lot of other things. But there was this one thing that I had never known about O'Hara, which was that he was wonderful with children. And that was something that my father didn't take on himself.
Well, that's a beautiful observation that you were able to make in your research. You discuss some of your interviewees, and you ruminate on the value of poetry in society. And this goes a little bit to a question that I posed earlier. This question of whether it has an impact or a value in 2023, right, on the culture. Can you distill your thoughts or your findings on the subject at all?
Well, I would never say a word against poetry. That's what I'm fishing for.
No. I guess I'm trying to figure out what is the utility. I believe that there is a utility for sure.
Yeah.
I guess, I want to sort of just discuss that a little bit. What the power of the utility is in this age where we're obsessed with like video games and movies where things blow up. It's
right. I mean, it's religious. I think. I mean, I think about reading poetry, and I'm not as up on contemporary poetry as I should be. But if I'm reading like Octavio Paz Sunstone or Yeats, or which I was doing earlier today, or whatever it is, like it's you think differently, right? You feel differently, and it puts you in a whole different place. My father, when he was dying, we recited poetry back and forth, like things we had memorized. And I actually just I had to do his gravestone, and I put some William Blake on there because he had on his deathbed, all this William Blake had shown up, and who doesn't want William Blake on their tombstone? I think
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
we all.
I think there's a real therapeutic quality to poetry, and I know this sounds cliche and maybe a little bit corny, but there really is like a healing power to it, and I think that that's something that we have to be careful that we don't ever lose sight of culturally, because everything moves so fast now, and we're always so hungry for something that's stimulating in a way that is diversionary, right? And I think poetry doesn't divert; it focuses,
Right.
and that's really
Right.
important. It's an important thing to do.
And in a way, it's better for kids used to YouTube and whatnot, because it's shorter and faster. I was just with my son in Boston, and he still remembered a lot of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere because I'd read it to him so many times when he was a little boy.
That's a really good point too. Is it doesn't require the same commitment as a novel, right? You also discussed Janet Malcolm's sentiment in The Silent Woman, that once we are born, we no longer own the facts of our own lives. I love that sentence. Once we are born, we no longer own the facts of our own lives. This was on page 146, of course. Please talk to us a little bit more about this and how it related to your process of writing about O'Hara and your father.
Well, I had to, because I was trying to write a biography and then was thwarted from doing a biography. I had to think about, why would one read or write a biography about a writer when you have their work? Why do you need to know more? And I think it's a good question. And I try to wrestle with it. I don't know that I answer it definitively, but yeah, I think that if we have something to say, we need to try to say it, even if it's something somebody else doesn't necessarily want to hear in that moment.
Yeah, I think that there is there's kind of a poignancy to that, So you've written New York history, you've written memoir, you've written national news, you've written generational lament, as you put it. You wrote that you switch so differently. There's so different kinds of writing because you're too easily distracted. We were talking about distraction a moment ago, and you feel as though you're prone to distraction. Could you talk a little bit more about this and how it relates to your career? And is that why maybe you like to sort of bounce around from so many different sort of genres or projects?
Yeah, I just kind of follow things that I find interesting, and maybe it's growing up in New York, and so easily getting bored, and so being a little bit like a magpie and following shiny things, whatever's interesting in the moment. It's not a good career strategy. I don't think I'd recommend it. When all your books are like, every one of my books, I have a lot of friends who run bookstores. It's like, and they're like, yeah, every one of your books is in a different place, right? Not two of them are together. It's like cultural studies and feminist things, whatever. So yeah, I don't know that it's a good idea, but I also don't know how else I can't focus enough to do the same thing over and over. So
that's something I can relate to as well. I've written
you've
novels,
done that. Exactly.
short stories, anthologies, graphic novels, screenplays. Yeah, I feel like when you have that sort of hunger or that drive to explore something or dissect something or express something, I don't know if it matters so much if the genre is something that is consistent.
And you run a zoo. Can you tell the people?
I run a zoo. Yeah, for those of you who are at home that have never known this about me, my husband and I have like 24 animals. In addition to your dad's cancer, there was also that terrible fire that you mentioned in your childhood home, and you thought about O'Hara's sister Maureen and the big warning she had shared with you about writing this book. You intimated that maybe you felt as though like some hexes were put on you because you were pursuing.
I'm not trying to say anybody's a witch. I'm not. No, I thought when you're sort of threatened by somebody, and then all these bad things happen, I definitely was like, wait, was this the bad stuff that was was foretold.
Yeah.
I don't actually think that in a real way.
No. I thought it was. You're not a mystic, but I thought that it was it was a funny like moment of levity that you were sort of like, my God, all of these horrible things are happening, and I had just been sort of in this situation with this person who threatened me. Could this have been a hex? I thought that was a very healthy way of sort of dealing with it. You wrote that you spent your whole career trying to pave your own path and get out of the shadow of your dad, of course, who was well known in many circles. And please talk to us a little bit about this and what Also a Poet did in terms of closure, possibly in that specific area.
Well, in some way, it was the opposite because I had worked really hard to have no one know that we were related. I changed my name when I was in college. I dropped Calhoun is my middle name legally, and I dropped Sheldall for the purpose of writing for the local newspaper. I thought like, oh, nobody will ever know we're related, and so I wanted to deal with people saying anything about nepotism or comparing us. And it worked. By the time I moved back to New York, people didn't know we were related, even people who were at the New Yorker. And I guess it helped that he didn't talk super often about about family. And so I kind of flew under the radar, and I was able to build a career just without that cloud, I guess. Then, of course, I just did this book, and then now everybody knows. And it was the first time even friends of mine, not close, like all my close friends knew my family, but acquaintances and people who read my other books maybe had read his work too and had never made the connection before. So I made it for everybody. I couldn't have done it sooner. I know that. I think I really had to have done enough by myself to feel good about that and okay about that. And there was closure because he liked the book and because he gave me that gift of saying it was true, and he came to the book party and he read a poem, and it was the best thing that ever happened to us.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that he had the opportunity to see the book and give you that approval. I think that's really beautiful and profound. Do you have a favorite Frank O'Hara poem?
Do I have a favorite? I love the Harbor Master. And what other Ave Maria I really like. Music. Lana Turner Has Collapsed might be an all-time hit.
Yeah, I like that one a lot too. How about your dad? Do you know his favorite?
He liked Lana Turner, and he also liked the one set at the 5 spot, which is down the block, so that was he could recite that one from memory.
Wow. We should tell everybody that we'll be taking questions shortly for Ada, so please start sending them in. So in what ways have you been able, I still have a few more questions of my own before we get to theirs as they start sending them in. In what ways have you been able to discern your father's influence on Frank and Frank's influence on your father? Because it was kind of an interesting corollary, I think.
Well, that was something surprising too when I started reading up on Frank O'Hara and then also my father. People did compare them even back in the 70s, and there was this takedown. I can't remember where it was, New Criterion or something, and this critic just ripped my father apart and said, "Oh yeah, he's like trying to be Frank O'Hara." I mean, people really noticed that was something that he was cultivating. So, and I think it makes sense. They both wrote poetry, wrote about art, and they had a sophistication and a humor and an accessibility. So they weren't writing academically. It wasn't art history. It wasn't Ivory Tower at all. It was this mix of writing about bad movies and Coca-Cola and city sidewalks and about beautiful works of art.
I guess those parallels are there's an overlap, and I guess it's a fair comparison to make. This wasn't something that I asked you to do before we started, but would you be open to reading a passage from your book or
sure,
one of your Frank? Yeah, that'd be great. Do you have something?
Would you rather have? Do you want to? Yeah, I'll grab one. Hold on.
Okay.
Would you rather have, I'm assuming that, or do you want to read a Frank O'Hara poem? I think you have lunch poems there.
I do have lunch poems here, right next to your
Why
book.
why don't you read why don't you read a Frank O'Hara poem? Well,
okay,
I
well,
look for something to read.
I will do that. Which one should I read? Let's see what jumps out at me. Let me see if I can quickly find. I will read. How about music?
Oh, very nice.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. If I rest for a moment near the equestrian, pausing for a silver sausage sandwich in the Mayflower shop, that angel seems to be leading the horse into Bergdorf's, and I am naked as a tablecloth, my nerves humming, close to the fear of war and the stars which have disappeared. I have in my hand only 25 cents. It's so meaningless to eat, and gusts of water spray over the basins of leaves like the hammers of a glass pianoforte. If I seem to you to have lavender lips under the leaves of the world, I must tighten my belt. It's like a locomotive on the march, the season of distress and clarity, and my door is open to the evenings of midwinter's lightly falling snow over the newspapers. Clasp me in your handkerchief like a tear. Like a tear. Trumpet of early afternoon in the foggy autumn, as they're putting up the Christmas trees on Park Avenue. I shall see my daydreams walking by with dogs and blankets, put to some use before all those colored lights come on. But no more fountains and no more rain, and the stores stay open terribly late. 1953.
Oh, beautiful. Well done.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. I'll read a page from my book about.
That'd be great.
Okay, great. And then yes, and there's some questions, but keep asking questions. Cool. I'll answer anything. I won't say who I've ghostwritten written for, but anything else.
Okay.
Okay, so I took my father to a cancer appointment.
Mm-hmm.
We were told the tumors had shrunk by more than half. He was not cured, but he probably had extra time now and would likely cough less. The doctor asked how he was feeling. Tired, depressed, he said. All I want to do is write, and I can't concentrate. You could retire, the doctor said, smiling but serious. People do retire, you know. My father shook his head. How about therapy, the doctor asked. I suppose it might feel good to rattle away to someone for 50 minutes without feeling like I had to apologize for it, he said. But it was clear he wouldn't pursue that course of action. He weighed 128 pounds. His eyes looked huge behind his glasses. He'd grown a gray beard. Add a rough collar and he could be in an old master's painting. When he pulled up his shirt to show the doctor his chest, I saw his pale, thin body. He joked that he was playing host to a gang war between the immunotherapy and the cancer, with both living off the land. My father asked if he could have something for his low energy. The doctor said they could look into steroids at some point. Oh, my father replied, brightening. I used to love speed. That could be great. I love speed too, my mother chimed in. The two began chattering about how in the 1960s they took speed all the time, how they got so much done. Okay, that's enough, I said. It made you crazy, though, my father said to my mother, ignoring me. When we started dating, I made her throw it out, he told the doctor. And you thought I did, my mother said, laughing girlishly. Will you both please stop talking about how much you love speed, I said. Speed is not even on the table here. The doctor is talking about your maybe trying steroids at some point. Steroids are not amphetamines. Oh, my father said, looking disappointed. My mother, as she rummaged in her purse for a stick of gum, whispered, I did love speed, though.
That's great. That's beautiful. Thank you. You know, before we get to the questions, there's just one more passage I really wanted to read out loud because it's so beautiful. It's on page 230 of your book. It does. I think you do a really good job of summing up your take on legacy, posterity, and balance. And after I read it, if you could say anything else about these ideas, that would be great too. My father believes his work is his only legacy. I know he's wrong. Whether or not he values it, my father has done more with his life than right. He had me for one thing. And one day I will leave behind not only my books, but also my son and my stepson and my godchildren and my house and the memories held by friends. I took what I needed from him, a sense of the power and importance of writing. And I added to it a belief that it's possible to be good as well as great. I love that so much. Is there anything you can say is there anything left to say, honestly, after that? That's the question.
I think I stand by that. I think that, I think that's one big lesson, right? About when we look at our parents and what they did that we want to do or don't want to do is how do we find some sense of wholeness? How do we live a life that feels more complete in some way, or that takes what they did and builds on it somehow. And I think that I'm really grateful for everything he did give me and did teach me. And I want my life to be better. And the ways in which I think it is better already have to do with the part you read, with this idea of that I spend a lot of time with my family and I really love them. And
That's so
and
great.
that makes everything better.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so here's some questions from our viewers. Thank you for this wonderful Culture Connection book talk, Ms. Calhoun. Can you comment on the recent rash of book bans on public school libraries in the USA right now?
What's so funny is the effort to make Frank O'Hara this very kind of saccharine, easy going kind of like non-dangerous character, which I think there has been some move to do that, to hide some of the racier things he did. I just it seems quite impossible, right? Like, and even some of the move to not do as much biography of him seemed to come out, at least in part, of this desire to hide his homosexuality. When he has poems called things like homosexuality, like it's the title of one of his poems. I'm like, you're not gonna hide it, right? Like, so I think a lot of the book bans, it seems so naive, right? Things like, how are you gonna do that? Really, is it gonna actually make a difference if you're gonna try to keep people from things they need to read? Books will be found. Ideas will be found somehow, one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Here's another question. As you see New York City emerge from the great pandemic, what are some of the changes you have noticed about life here now?
Yeah, it's interesting. It got a little less glossy, right? I mean, there's so many. I mean, I want you to answer that too, Brian, because it seems like there's so many more boarded up stores, for one thing, in the Village, which was really surprising. That hasn't been true in a very long time. And it just feels there's a little grimier, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have family in Chinatown, and we're there every week, and we travel down Canal, and it, pre 2020 and post 2020, it feels like on some level we went 40 years into the past, and it's like New York of the early 80s again, which is on the one hand kind of exciting and kind of cool, but also not wonderful. I feel like I'm ambivalent about the whole thing. Honestly.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, and I think there's been some celebration of this idea of like, it's going to be more like the 70s again. I'm like, I don't think we lived through the 70s. If you're saying that, it's like, it wasn't great.
I think we romanticize these things because we weren't there, and so we're able to enjoy it through like a Martin Scorsese film, or it's Taxi Driver's a Patti Smith book. Yeah, but it's that's the best part of it. That's what that period and place produced. And maybe there is an excitement and electricity to be a part of those things being created in real time. But the price is that you have to endure desperation and violence and drug abuse and a lot of things that are not wonderful or cool or worth romanticizing. So I think I have a lot of mixed feelings about that.
My friend on that, like my friend Susanna says, she says, like, in past life regression stuff, everybody was always the Pharaoh's beautiful daughter, right? Like everybody, right? Like how many Pharaoh's daughters were there? And is it possible that maybe some people were actually just building the pyramids, right? Like in your past life, you probably weren't going to be the most glamorous person. And same thing with the 70s. It's like not everybody was hanging out with Patti Smith, right? Like a lot of people in the 70s were getting mugged. Like,
yeah, we're talking about like a few dozen people who lived like a very charmed life in that period versus like tens of thousands who had it really kind of hard.
Right.
It's not,
astronomical murder rate and like
no. Can you tell of a few of your favorite books that have New York City as a subject?
Oh, that's fun. I should be able to answer that right off the top of my head. It's funny. The Power Broker comes to mind. And I was just listening to the audiobook of that in the car with my son, and it's almost hilarious, the introduction where it lists all the things that Robert Moses built. There's like it's like page after page after page. It's like, and this parkway, and this parkway, and this parkway, and this park, and that book is an amazing achievement. What are some of yours? While I think of more of mine, I think you.
Thin Life of Cities by oh my God, I'm blanking out her name right now.
Oh, Jane Jacobs.
Jane Jacobs. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other
Metropolitan Life by Fran Lebowitz. Metropolitan
wonderful.
Life. Yeah.
John Powell novels I really love. Have you read those? They're all set in the village in the, I guess, 40s mostly, and she lives in around 8th Street, and they're so funny. They're like Turn Magic Wheel, Locusts Have No King, Angels on Toast. They're just like incredibly witty and charming. There's this line about her that Dorothy Parker got all her lines from Don Powell. They were actually really said by Don Powell. Anyway, they feel so contemporary. So if you're at parties and people are being very climby and graspy, I always think like they're just Don Powell characters, right? They just are the same. They've been for 100 years.
Kind of caricatures. A century later. Yeah, like archetypes more than caricatures, I guess.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now, Ada? I know this came out last year, and you're ghostwriting regular. This is your full-time job, but any books of your own that you're outlining?
Yeah, I'm trying to do. Well, one thing I want to write about is mysticism. I'm really. I mean, part of it is like I guess I need to be in a different category of the bookstore, and so maybe religion, and then also I started working on a memoir. I went on this amazing residency to a Scottish castle called Hawthornden for a whole month. It was completely surreal, and so I wrote a memoir. I started a memoir, and I think it wants to be a novel, maybe. So I'll be curious to hear your experiences with doing both things.
You forgive my ignorance. You haven't yet written a novel, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So this is uncharted territory.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Thank you. We'll see.
Well, good luck with it.
Thank you.
The book is Also a Poet, Frank O'Hara, My Father, and Me. And Ada, thank you so much for this wonderful talk this evening.
Oh,
if you'd like to learn,
Brian.
Thank you so much. If you'd like to learn more about Ada and her work, it's adacalhoun.com, and the link is in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. Thank you for watching.